Alright, so we're not exactly coming fresh off the heels of the last Distant Land special, Obsidian, but 2 weeks late is not that bad, is it? This time we're focused on the Marceline and Princess Bubblegum focus special, Obsidian. Obviously, we left on a pretty positive but abrupt note for the pairing, cementing once and for all that they were, in fact, a pairing. Based on the plethora of evidence built up, many would say this was an endgame destined to happen due to how it was all built up. But nevertheless, I think it's a cool thing to have happen to the two of them, and as such, a cool thing to highlight in this multi-part special event. Luckily, there's no shortage of episodes to peek at their character development. The makeup of this relationship canvassed the whole series at points, even eking into the lives of others like Finn and Ice King. So it's a rich story that maintains its integrity all throughout. People actually got fired when there was even a thought of compromising the story in some way. So it's going to be a hell of a time to recap this time around. As a side note, the comics also have a bunch to add on to the story, but since they're considered non-canonical in a sense, I can't really go into them here. Maybe in a separate thing, I don't know yet. Let me know if you want to see it. The last one of these actually flopped, but I had fun doing it, and it was easy to make, so throw me a bone if you will. Just let me know if you want to see more. More spoilers are ahead. Obviously. Slumber Party Panic is considered to be the first episode of the entire series by airing order, and it certainly does set the tone for the rest of the high-flying adventures yet to come. The entire episode follows a quest carried out by Finn and Bubblegum to convert zombified Candy Kingdom zombies back to their sugary, sweet, lovable default selves. All the while they have to keep all the rest of the kingdom, Jake included, out of the scheme. This episode is a pretty great episode by early Adventure Time standards, but is wildly inconsequential to the wider relational arc. While writing this, I initially didn't even remember why I put it on the list in the first place, but as it turns out, its placement is due to this one throwaway line.
Old Mr. Cream Puff?
We used to date.
This ain't even relevant in the grand scheme of things. Like, as far as I can tell, this dude literally only became relevant again in the final season to help complete Bubblegum's backstory in one episode in flashback form. So besides serving as prime flashback fodder, he is purely an incidental character. Wild, huh? Go With Me is another early episode that brings that classic adventuring flavor into full view. See, Finn and Jake want to go see a movie on couples night. While obviously Jake's covered on that front, Finn would still need to take someone with him. So with Jake's mad courting skills and Marceline's cold-blooded presence, he sets out to convince the princess to accompany him on movie night. There's a lot of choice tension sprinkled throughout this episode, not only because Jake and Marcy are hell-bent on putting the kid in the middle of their cracked-out schemes, but because Finn himself is clearly wrestling with his own emotions. Toward the end, he concedes that he was never chasing after PB out of some form of romantic intention, but of course you can see this goober blushing in every other scene around her. His guileless naivety kind of makes him look deranged in front of his secret first love, but exposes the mild negative feedback radiating off these two women. So you get a little bit of foreshadowing that actually pans out this time. Memory of a Memory is the ultimate peek behind the curtain into the epic glut of backstory to come. Finn and Jake are tasked with extracting one of Marceline's memories by a mysterious stranger, but soon discovering their true intentions, they learn a bit more about her past and in a way, help her get past the past. Parallel to the last time we learned about one of these exes, we knew next to nothing about him, so having been thrown into a whole shebang of potent relationship drama makes it feel not only like a real plot point, but a real adventure. In the grand scheme of things, this is only another body to add to the excoriatingly long list of exes to come, but other than that, it's just a fun episode. What Was Missing is a choice fan favorite episode that gives us the exact right hint of relational strife. Finn, Jake, Marcy, Beemo, and Bubblegum are brought to this canyon to retrieve items that they had previously lost, but in order to really get their stuff back, they'd have to open a set of golden gates that are activated by the literal truth. So, in a few musical performances, they manage to get the gates open and bare their souls to each other in the most potent ways. Finn's song ultimately got them their stuff back, but it was Marceline's display that was the most captivating and compelling.
Sorry I don't treat you like you're perfect, like all your little loyal subjects do.
Her song, while brooding and cloudy in ways most typical for her in any event, were particularly pointed in the moment, and the gates only confirmed that much once they started glowing in awe. It's interesting because it was initially response to how Bubblegum was needling her for her musical stylings and general vampness, but it was ultimately speaking to underlying baggage she might have been harboring indefinitely. When she tries to front, the doors stop glowing, a sign that her more bold and brash jam really did belong in the trash, for it was not the full truth. It doesn't faze Bubblegum one bit, but the reflection of Marceline's emotional infidelity hitting her right back does make her falter a bit and put down the walls for just a brief moment. It's a very telling scene that helps to make this episode so memorable. Simon and Marcy is probably perceived as a top 20 episode series-wide, and I'd be remiss to disagree on that front. It's an old-school story told to Finn and Jake through flashback of the two eponymous characters exploring the wreckage of the world in a freshly apocalyptic goo. Ice King was just emerging out of the crackling facade of a rapidly evolving Simon Petrikov, and the millenniums-old Vamp Queen was but a sickly child here. So the two were left on their own to fumble about and find some chicken soup for Marcy's affliction of indeterminate cause. This episode is not as explicitly a BUBBLINE giveaway, but about 2/3 in, you'll find a cool continuity Easter egg of sorts. Again, Bubblegum wasn't exactly around at this point, so she doesn't appear as herself, but in a way her presence is serendipitously felt. You'll be surprised how much hot pink can blend into a gray, desaturated world. The Sky Witch is perhaps considered the very first time on screen Marceline and Bubblegum make some progress in the right direction, and the story they're thrust into gives them a damn good reason to feel that way. On a whim, Marceline drags Bubblegum along for a fox hunt to track down the aforementioned Sky Witch in an effort to recover an old callback from a few seasons previous. Upon finding out, Bubblegum is indignant, but they continue along anyway and recover the lost item for an unexpected sacrifice. This episode would make for a good starter episode to spring on someone who was tangentially interested in this show, partially because of this dynamic at play. It creates as much intrigue as it solves, but it still manages to be a satisfying bookend in the moment for these two characters. Varmints is like a good precursor to the miniseries starting up in a few episodes from a tonal perspective. Fresh off the events of the Candy Kingdom takeover, Marceline finds an isolated Bonnie and joins her on a varmint hunt to keep her pumpkin patch safe. Now, in contrast to the previous episode, this one would be considered a major push forward for the two former friends. Once again, it's a really interesting dynamic just to see play out. Obviously, they weren't on great terms prior to the degree of saturation, but now there's an air of awkwardness. They don't exactly remember how to lovingly push each other's buttons anymore. They talk through a lot, they experience more when they're hunting down pumpkin-starved demon creatures, and then eventually they come to a good consensus. The last time they confronted harbored stuff on the emotional back end, both of them pretty much checked out. Here, they've had a lot more to process with each other rather than leave and dip out of the conversation. In the end, you'll feel like they've made a big enough breakthrough with each other's varmints. See what I did there? So Stakes is the groundbreaking first miniseries in the Adventure Time canon, and it's focused on Marceline's descent into mortality and extra run-ins with vampires from her past. It's hard to chunk off all the development bit by bit without taking 20 minutes to run through it all or condensing it into being too anticlimactic fashion to properly pay tribute to this series. I mean, as far as general consensus goes, like a good 3/4 of the miniseries is heavily focused on Marceline and Bubblegum. Not necessarily from a romantic standpoint either. Their whole amiability makes pretty good strides here. The whole of it is a great mid-series spiritual journey I haven't seen or heard too much to complain about, and upon my previous rewatch, I would highly recommend it. Broke His Crown is the perfect storm of relational leg-ups, leftover emotional angst, and backstory-infested Ketchup. Marceline takes Bubblegum on a date of sorts, except they're spending the night out with a heavily cooked-out Ice King under duress of his malfunctioning crown. When he starts to get really bad, the two women have to get to the root of the issue and discover the ecosystem lurking inside the literal golden underbelly of the head covering. Strong general episode aside, I think the prospect of the date even existing is really nice. Not because of what the three did, but because of what it represents and how it carries forward. For much of this series, as we came into it, the two had a really contentious rivalry born out of mutual hurt and lack of understanding for each other's ethos. By this point, they'd been recovering pretty well, and even if they're not 100% on board with each other, I feel like they move in sync much more easily. Marceline's not uber protective of these other parts of her life by this point, but she thought ahead long enough to want for Bubblegum to try and get to know the gentleman under the cloak. Now, previously, Bubblegum hasn't been great with understanding, things that are important to Marceline, but she extended that other chance to her anyway. Probably next to nothing to Bonnie in the grand scheme of things, but the exposure is an effort, and that's an effort that certainly pays off later. Musical is a solid but ultimately unremarkable episode focused on Finn the human and more conceptual hullabaloo I'm not equipped to dissect while recording this in the middle of the night. Anyway, he's in charge of judging a battle of the bands with many familiar faces on board when he keeps being drawn away by a mysteriously eerie singing voice around the place. What makes this notable in the context of this video would be the inclusion of Marceline's more, sentimental entry.
I don't know what to do without you. I don't know where to put my hands.
Enough said, really. So Element, being the third and final miniseries, is a pretty good dovetail for the conclusion to the end of Islands, which I also highly recommend, while offering enough to satisfy on its own. Happening concurrently with Finn's great adventure and colliding with the tail end of such, the land of Ood becomes corrupted with elemental magic from a magical scheme gone awry. So this sends the team scrambling around a slimy, icy, fiery, and sticky upside-down landmass to set everything right. Obviously, with Princess Bubblegum at the center of the chaos, you'd think there'd be a telling scene here or there, but there isn't much to it here. It's a roving adventure from start to finish, and it doesn't really stop to establish much. Since Bubblegum helped make part of the new Ooh, her gum essence created all these whacked out versions of Adventure Time characters, Marceline included, who is now known as Marceline, the Campfire Queen. I'd say this speaks more to Bub's more intimate, subconscious perception of her would-be lover, but considering how every candy-coated character is as kooky as her in these moments, that claim would probably come with quite negligible evidence. All the same, it's a good mini-series that may satisfy the more adventurous at heart after all the conceptual soul-searching done in the Islands arc. Ketchup is actually an episode I'm kicking myself for not including in BMO's list. It was entirely user-suggested, and had it not been mentioned specifically to me, I doubt I would have the foresight to check it out for this list. And it is a pretty good one to include. It's set up like a simple one-off episode. It's just about Marcy and BMO reminiscing on their time exploring vast worlds during the time of the Islands arc. BMO is more summative of the whole experience, while Marcy's is more emotionally focused, and once she finds that she has no end to a tale she's trying to relay to the little robot, they actually come to a very satisfying and emotionally rich conclusion for her. No cap, I think Ketchup is one of my favorite Adventure Time episodes, and that's coming from a scrub who has a bit less than like a third of the series to catch up on. I think it's a really good encapsulation of what the show is, and while it's still pretty settled in a way only the later seasons could be, it's a really compelling peek behind the curtain for these characters. Marcy and BMO is a dynamic I really wish we got more of. Like, not enough to fill a compilation disc or anything, but maybe more subtle interactions here or there. If Marceline and Bubblegum weren't a prominent focus in what was missing, then I can imagine these two easily stealing the show. I also love the guest animation sequences. They create a really ethereal atmosphere that probably worked really well in the first or last Distant Lands installments. The way that the two imagine their adventures to be are very much in character to them, and as comedically focused as the timing and much of the movement is, the last couple of minutes really settled down and delivered unto us one of the most heartwarming endings of the whole season. The main draw, of course, would have to be the story Marcy chooses to tell and how she does it. There are clear analogs to her and the princess here, and since the story is incomplete, that is to mean the real story has to have ended on an incomplete note too, looking to possible past emotional reckoning and a possible souring of their relationship. Nothing set in stone. Not to mention, it also probably alludes to the darker side of the Bubblegum dynasty that would ultimately unfurl in Season 10, Episode 4 segment Bonnabelle Bubblegum. Nevertheless, where Ketchup picks up these lopsided bookends marred with past emotional trauma and downers, and makes for a beautifully soothing and optimistic cap to a very long saga. It's a real recap, but also a worthy palate cleanser considering the final episode on this list. "17 is actually a really fitting start off to a very tumultuous final season. It doesn't mean anything profound in the scope of this list, but its content in general would leave you stewing with burning questions for many a time. As the title would suggest, Finn is turning 17, and a party in the castle quickly turns into an impromptu competition with a mysterious stranger. The reveal ties into the ongoing build to the reveal in the series finale, but the general vibe of the last couple minutes is decidedly a fair way of describing your feelings to seeing the show go through developmental stasis in the middle of its run. Obviously, by this point, PB and Marceline have yet to seal the deal all official-like, but their friendship is as good as gold from here on out. It's the little things that stand out, and by this point, you likely don't need to point to any big gestures to reach that final conclusion. And that's pretty much it as far as this list goes. So the christening of BUBBLINE was something I never really got to experience myself. After the 5th season or so, a lot of my interest in Adventure Time quickly got sanctioned and put into other ongoing projects. It's not even really a ship I saw as that big back in the day, obvious bias and all. That said, seeing everything come together, I'm as excited to see this conclude as I am to finally finish this video and watch Obsidian, which I've been holding off for so long. It's been killing me. If Peppermint Butler's part comes out before February, so I might have to jump on another character study prematurely. After all, it was the prospect of a little robot's living that convinced me to pop into the music hole to see where it took us. It turns out, it can get you quite far.